أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا Muhammad وآله الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the Dictations. Inshallah, we'll be beginning the series of talk shows, if you want to call them presentations. Let's see how this transpires, this program transpires. There's a lot to talk about. There's a back history to this series as well. There was a time, I think back in 2017, 2018, a couple of my friends, while we were studying in Qom, we had this intention, we had a plan to sort of start a podcast series of some sort or a talk show where we could just come and discuss contemporary issues, issues pertaining to scholarship, scholarly discussions that are taking place in the seminary, and to really try and raise the bar higher in the communities, particularly those who are in the West. Personally, I believe that the Western Muslim community and the Shia community in particular is decades behind in terms of their understanding of the type of discussions that are taking place in places such as Iran and Iraq, and basically Muslim countries, and discussions that are taking place inside the Arab and the Persian world. So we had this idea, and we even thought about different names that we could possibly give these series of talks. For example, we came up with a name called Mubahatha being this it's like a discussion that takes place in the hawza. So after a hawza, a seminarian, when they study a certain book or a certain concept, they often engage in a conversation about it with their colleagues or classmates. So we came up with an idea like that. We even came up with a list of different topics and so on. But life got really busy over there, and we didn't have the the technology either. We didn't have the camera set up and so on. So the idea kind of went down the drain. But that conversation would keep up coming up every few months to every few years. So alhamdulillah, this specific program, the Dictations, is inspired by those initial conversations that we would have. As far as the name is concerned, there was another podcast series that I wanted to start as well a couple of years ago. And once again, the table of contents of it was made, everything was ready to go. And the name that I gave it was I called it the Beggar's Bowl, which is an English translation of the word kashkul. Some of my classmates made fun of the name. But anyways, I realized there was another brother in the community, an academic actually, on YouTube, and they launched a podcast and they called it Kashkul as well. So I said, oh wow, they got to it before me. So I was intending to call this Kashkul as well, but I decided obviously not to call it Kashkul, and instead we thought of the name the Dictations, which comes from the word al-Amali. Now, because the name of this program is inspired by the genre of literature called the al-Amali, well, in that case, we want to actually begin with an interesting, I want to pull it up over here, an interesting ayah of the Quran. And you want to look at, this ayah a little bit over here. This is obviously from Surah Maryam, where it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ukhta Harun, ma kana abuki imra'a saw'in, wa ma kanat ummuki baghiyya. O the sister of Harun, your father was not an indecent man, nor was your mother, unchaste. Now, this ayah of the Quran is very interesting, and Sayyid Murtada, Sharif Murtada, as they also call him, one of the greatest, Shi'i scholars, Sayyid Murtada, he has a book called al-Amali, which we will, inshallah discuss today. And in his Amali, he brings this ayah up. He brings this narration, he brings this verse of the Quran up. And I'm actually gonna, start off with this, just to sort of, and it might give you an idea of what type of discussions these scholars were having in their al-Amali. And what he is saying is that, so he is sitting in this class. Okay, most likely some say that this was probably he was probably giving this class while he was in Hajj, in Mecca, for example, because he used to have a lot of non-Shia audiences in his class. So imagine him sitting in a majlis meaning a gathering, a classroom, and he probably has, dozens of people listening to him, dozens of students, scholars sitting in this gathering. So he says that, somebody asks a question. If somebody decides to ask a question about this ayah, فَقَالْ مَنْ هَارُونَ, right? Who is this Harun who is attributed to Maryam as her brother? And it says it's known that she didn't have a brother named Harun, and because Harun is the brother of Musa alayhi salam. So who on earth is this Harun? So he is now sitting in class and he has to answer this question, because it's an important question. And this is a question, if you Google it up, this is a discussion amongst the mufassirin of the Quran and historians as well, academics, like who on earth is this Harun? Because Harun is the brother of Musa. That's how we know who Harun is, Prophet Harun. And Harun lived, ages before Maryam, Lady Maryam. So who is this Harun? So he goes in his, in his book. Well, this is what we have the book today. And he starts to give these different possibilities. And he says, some group of scholars have said this Harun is this person. Some have said it is this other person. So let's look at some of the answers that he tries to give. He says that minha, one of the opinions over here is that anna Harun al-Madhkur kana rajulan fasiqan. Okay, there was a man named Harun. Okay, it was a man, and he was very famous for his shar and fasad, for his evil and his corruption. So when these people saw Maryam bringing this child, this baby, okay, and Maryam obviously is not married, okay, they attributed, they called her the sister of Harun, tashbihan wa tamthilan, out of, in a figurative way. They said, oh, you sister of Harun, meaning Harun is this evil person who's known for his corruption and indecent acts. So they're calling her the sister of Harun, because of the fact that she resembles him in his, indecency. Okay, so he says, وَكَانَ تَقْدِيرُ الْكَلَامِ, basically, so the ayah technically is saying, يَا شَبِيهَةَ هَارُونَ فِي فِسْقِهِ وَقَبِيحِ فِعْلِهِ, Oh, the one who resembles Harun in his fisq, in his corruption, and in the, ugliness of his actions. Okay, وَهَذَا الْقَوْلُ يُرْوَى عَنْ سَعِيد بن جُبَيْرٍ, and this is a quote that, this basically saying this is an opinion that somebody had, a person named Sayyid bin Jubair. So that's one opinion he brings up in class. A second opinion, he says that no, وَمِنْهَا أَنَّ هَارُونَ هَذَا كَانَ أَخَاهَ لِأَبِيهَا دُونَ أُمِّهَا, that this was actually her brother from her father. So her father had a son named Harun, and this was her brother basically from her father, so meaning maybe from another wife essentially. And then he says, well, no, some people say that no, it was actually not her stepbrother, it was actually her real brother. وَقِيلَ إِنَّهُ كَانَ أَخَاهَ لِأَبِيهَا وَأُمِّهَا, that no, this was actually her real brother. وَكَانَ رَجُلًا مَعْرُوفًا بِالصَّلَاحِ وَحُسْنِ الطَّرِيقَةِ وَالْعِبَادَةِ, that actually this was a man who was known for his good behavior, righteousness, piety. So basically they are shocked. They are saying, oh, ya ukhta Harun, oh, the sister of Harun, how could you have done this? Harun is somebody, your brother is somebody who is so righteous and pious. How could you have done, this act? And then based off of this, he says, well, a group of people say that no, إِنَّهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ أَخَاهَا عَلَى الْحَقِيقَةِ, that no, this was not actually her real brother, but rather, they are saying that there was a man whose name was, there was a righteous man who was who belonged to her, nation, who belonged in her family. And when he died, 40 people attended his janazah, and all of them were named Harun, and they were all from Bani Israel. So because of the righteousness of this qawm, okay, who were all from Bani Israel, they saw, so likewise, basically they're saying that, you are from a family or from a tribe or from a group of people, from a qawm who is known for, their righteousness. Okay, you are the qawm from whom this individual who was known for his righteousness, and 40 people attended his janazah, and all of them were named Harun. So they are saying, ya shabihatahu fi salah. Okay, meaning, oh, the one who resembles Harun in his righteousness, ma kana hada ma'rufan mink. This is not the type of act that is known from you. Okay, this is not something that is known from your qawm, from your tribe, from your family. So, this is basically another explanation that he says. Okay, and then he quotes a narration from, from the Prophet. He says that, this narration that he quotes, he says actually this narration strengthens this, third opinion, basically. And then he goes and he says, another group of people say that no, Ya Ukhta Harun means Ya man hiya min nasli Harun, Akhi Musa. They say no, it actually does mean, this Harun that's being referred to over here does mean the brother of Musa alayhi salam, but it's being said meaning that she is from the progeny of Harun, the brother of Musa. Just like you say in the Arab, in the Arabic custom, you say Ya Aqa Bani Tamim, okay, or Ya Aqa Bani Fulan, or you are somebody who's from the Bani Tamim. Well, Tamim was probably somebody who lived, centuries before, this individual who's being addressed, but they're still referred to him as the brother of Tamim or the brother of Bani Tamim, because they are from that same nasl, same progeny and lineage and so on. And then at the end he says, وَكُلُّ قَوْلٍ مِّنْ هَذِهِ الْأَقْوَالِ قَدْ اخْتَارَهُ قَوْمٌ مِّنَ الْمُفَسِّرِينَ. He says every single of these opinions that I have just mentioned has been held up by some of the mufassirin, meaning every opinion has a proponent, and he doesn't prefer any of these opinions at the end. Okay, so that's what I wanted to start off with, to just kind of give you an idea of what exactly is contained in these al-Amali works. And this is just one of hundreds of discussions that he has in his book, Sayyid Murtada. So what we want to do is a little bit discuss what exactly is what exactly is an Amali. What are we talking about over here? Essentially, you have to understand how what were the ways that knowledge would be spread and transmitted in the early Muslim societies. Okay, so it's not like we have the internet and Wikipedia where people can just go on and search for information. No, knowledge was a very rigorous responsibility and a very rigorous task that it required people to put in a lot of effort. It required people to travel, for example, from one place to another place, just to even listen to one narration that they could maybe get and bring it back to their own hometown and spread it to the people, and then people would act upon that. So knowledge was not something that was very easy, that came very easy. No, you would have to travel, you would have to spend time with scholars in their classes, in very uncomfortable situations at times. Some people didn't have money, for example, and so on. So there are many stories. Inshallah, we will highlight some of these stories and the struggles of many of the ulama from different parts of the Muslim world in Islamic history over the course of many the lessons that we have. I don't want to discuss all the stories in the very first show, but essentially one of the ways in which knowledge was transmitted was by scholars. And right now in particular, who we're talking about are hadith scholars, the muhaddithun. The hadith scholars would organize gatherings most of the times in the masjid, in the mosques, and they would hold these gatherings where people, students in particular, scholars from different parts of the world, would come and attend and sit, and the scholar would then dictate a narration or multiple narrations, and essentially people will write them down. Okay, they will write them down, and once these were written down, they were later on compiled as a book format, and then they were published and distributed and whatever. Okay, that's the crux of what is an Amali. Okay, now it's a genre that is known to be produced by hadith scholars, because majority of the Amali works that we have, they are by the muhaddithun, people who are known for transmitting hadith. But this is while this is true, but it's not the case that only the hadith scholars were writing Amalis. No, we have Amalis by preachers, people who just tell stories, storytellers. You have some Amalis that were written by grammarians, and they would discuss grammatical discussions. For example, there's a scholar named al-Shajari. Al-Shajari is a grammarian, and his Amali is published. And he just discusses the different grammatical points, of Arabic sarf and nahw and so on, syntax and morphology, and he tries to bring up the ayat of the Quran, and it's a very interesting, Amali that that is published by a scholar named Ibn Shajari. Ibn Shajari used to live in the district called Karkh in Baghdad, and he had definitely some Shi'i tendencies. If he was not Shia, I'm not sure if he was Shia or not, but he was definitely from the Sadat. He was from the lineage of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he lived in Karkh. Karkh was a district that belonged to the Imami Shias, so it's very likely that he probably was a Shia, or at the very least had Shi'i tendencies. So he has a 2-volume Amali that is published on grammatical discussions. Interestingly, I got obsessed with the grammatical discussions maybe around 2014. I mean, we would all study grammar in the seminary, obviously, but in the beginning of the seminary studies, it was just, okay, we're learning sarf and nahw, and I thought that was kind of it. Like, you just learn the grammar and you're good to go. Only until one of our teachers, a very, very respected teacher of ours, Ustad Azizi, his name was. Maybe we'll forward this off to him as well, this video. He encouraged me to go attend a conference that was taking place in madrasa of Ayatollah Fazil Lankarani. There was an institute that he has over there, and there was a conference that was taking place on the importance or the role of Arabic grammar in ijtihad. So I think I actually have the transcript of that conference that I attended, the seminar, on Iqra Online. It's actually published. I'll link it in the description. So anyways, when I attended that, which was probably I think the second last term of me studying Arabic grammar in the Hawza, when I attended that, I got exposed to a whole different world of, how important grammar actually is. Because initially I didn't understand, why do they keep exposing us to these differences of opinions of the school of Kufa and the school of Basra, and this grammarian says this about this rule, and that grammarian says this about that school. I mean, I understood, there's ikhtilaf, there's difference of opinions, but how significant and important they were to study, I didn't know until I attended this conference. And then for a good year or so, I kind of got obsessed with, just grammatical discussions, and I started reading up, history of Arabic grammar. I've even summarized, written an article about that. Just a brief summary of history, development of Arabic grammar. Shawqi Laif was an important author I used to read. He has like a bunch of works on history of Arabic grammar. Anyways, in that entire year or so, I got exposed to Ibn Shajari as well. That's how I got to know who Ibn Shajari was. Anyways, so these Amalis were written, or they were basically sessions that would be organized by scholars, and they're not always called Amali, by the way. Some of the books are called Majalis or Maqalat. Some of them you'll even see the name sometimes Malfuzat. Malfuzat meaning loves, is from the word loves, things which are inscribed and written down. So you will find some of the scholars, their books will be called Majalis of Maslan Sheikh Fulan, or the maqalat of Sheikh Fulan, right? Not always the al-Amali of Sheikh Fulan. No, sometimes the name majalis and maqalat is also used for some of these works. Now, when did they begin? Okay, when do we start seeing this, genre developing? Perhaps you can date it back to the mid 3rd century hijri. Okay, so we're talking about, early 2nd, 3rd century hijri. Okay, and you find these Amali works, being attributed to different scholars. Now, there are some Amali works that are attributed to earlier scholars like Abdul Razak al-Samʿānī, but we are not very sure, what were exactly these Amalis. Were they exactly, what we just described, meaning that the scholar would sit and have these discussions and people will write it down, or no, were these something else? Because we don't have most of the earlier ones anyways with us today. Where we start seeing this huge increase in the Amalis is essentially from 4th century up until 6th, 7th century hijri. And that's when you see a serious influx in the Amali literature. Now, the Ahlul Sunnah, the Sunnis were producing the Amalis. The Zaydis were producing Amali literature, okay? And of course, the Imami Shias were producing the Amali literature as well. So it wasn't just like a Sunni thing, or, that's something that only a certain sect did. No, this was something that existed in the Muslim scholarly world. Okay, Sunni, Shia, Zaydis, all of them, grammarians, the Muhaddithin, the Mu'tazilis, all of them were participating in this, because this was just one form and one method of transmitting knowledge. Okay, and this culture of learning, the culture of learning and seeking knowledge that existed in the Muslim world. I mean, the Muslim world is known for that. It manifested in many different ways, and this was one of those ways, because that's essentially what it is. So going in the presence of a scholar and so on. Now, what would exactly happen in these gatherings? Okay, what you have is that, look, when a teacher comes to class, they have many of these teachers who are senior scholars. They would often possess a copy of certain work that very limited people had access to, or maybe only the scholar had access to it, because these were often passed down from one major scholar to another major scholar. So it's not that everyone just had access to these works. No, it didn't work that way. So oftentimes a major scholar would have access to a certain work, and they would bring that work to class, and then often just select certain narrations, certain reports from it, and they would dictate to an audience of students. Now, amongst these students, they would usually pick one individual who would be responsible for writing down the dictations. Now, multiple people may have been writing it down, but that one designated individual or that one designated student would be, ultimately responsible for writing it down, and it would be his work that will be presented to the teacher either at the end of the class or at the end of the series of lectures, and then the teacher would kind of review it, make sure everything's correct, and sign off on it. And then the teacher would often give permission to then narrate from this work and so on, depending, as I said, on the nature of the work. So right now we're talking mostly about the hadith scholars. The hadith scholars, they would be obviously narrating the hadith, and the chains of narrators would be mentioned in this, and so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is there's a book by a scholar of the 6th century called Ibn Samʿānī. Okay, I want to pull it up. Ibn Samʿānī had a book, okay, very interesting book called Adab al-Imlāʼ wal-Istimlāʼ. Now, this Ibn Samʿānī wrote an entire book on the etiquettes on how to do Imla and how to write down the Imla. Okay, so this is just showing you how significant this culture was of Imla or the Amalis, essentially. So much so that we have a book on the etiquettes of it, and this is published. I'm just gonna go through the table of contents of it, just so you can see, how the ulama were, taking this very, very seriously, and then also interestingly, look at the etiquettes that they would believe, these things have. Now, if you look over here, this is the basically the fahrist. So it starts over here. فصل في أدب المملي. Okay, so the one who is doing the Imla, what are the etiquettes that they should follow? Okay, so for example, over here it says that you should begin with some sort of a question that you want to answer. The scholar should make sure that their nails are cut and their mustaches are trimmed. They should try to wear white clothing. Make sure that their beard is combed. Put some perfume on. Look in the mirror. Make sure you're good to go. Begin the class with salam, and and so on. So it's mustahab to recite 2 rak'at before you even sit and begin your class, or make sure you sit in a very humble way. Okay, in a very humble way, and so on. So what else is he saying? So he's saying, make sure it's better to organize the gathering in the masjid. Is mustahab for the muhaddis to do imla in the masjid. Face the qibla. One should not touch the asl. So asl over here, we'll talk about it a little bit. Asl is actually the book that the scholar is going to be reading from. Obviously, the scholar must have some book that they are reading from and they are dictating from it. Okay, so this Ibn Samʿānī is saying that it's don't touch even that asl without tahara, and you should not narrate a hadith unless it is from a book. Okay, recite, begin with the surah. The people should listen, carefully. Make sure that your voice is loud and clear, so the person writing it, they don't make any mistakes, and so on and so forth. Begin with Bismillah, then do salawat on the Prophet, and all the way, many other. Make sure you're quoting from, trustworthy narrations which are famous. Do not, narrate from people who are weak, And then there's also a section on the person who is assigned to write down the dictations. Okay, meaning this person who is writing down the dictation, they have ishraf, they have a degree of nobility on the rest of the people. Okay, and make sure that the person who is chosen for this job is somebody who is afsah, who is the most eloquent, has some affinity with the hadith. Okay, so not just random person who's just going to write it down. No, an individual who is familiar with the hadith sciences, understands, how the hadiths are narrated and transmitted, so they are, they can write down very quicker, for example, and so on and so forth. So there's also other stuff about, putting, perfume and so on and so forth. Now, this is something that was also written, a work on the etiquettes of organizing the Amali, or the session of Imla, basically. That's how we should basically put it. Now, even though we are talking about the Amali, and we're saying that the hadith scholars were known for this, you would be surprised to see that even some of the Mu'tazilis, who were known for being extremely rational in their thought, and they were known for always interpreting the Quran in a very figurative way, they were not literalists whatsoever. You wouldn't expect them to have Amalis, because Amali was known to be a literature that's associated with the hadith scholars. But yet you find actually that there were some Mu'tazilis who had written or they have some Amalis. For example, one of the most famous Mu'tazili scholars, his name is Qadi Abdul Jabbar. He had an Amali, and then he had a student. His name was Abu Sa'd al-Samān, who was a Mu'tazili but also a Zaydi. Qadi Abdul Jabbar is a Shafi'i. Okay, this Abu Sa'd al-Samān is a Zaydi scholar, and he had an Amali as well. And this Abu Sa'd is known for, his travels. Okay, he had seen about 3,000 teachers. Okay, and he had taken narrations from around 3,000 teachers and so on. So you have some of the Mu'tazilis also writing the Amalis, and they would also, some of these guys were known for also, in their Amalis they're quoting a hadith, and these books became very important for the non-Mu'tazilis. Okay, for example, let's say the Ahlul Hadith, who were often the Hanbalis. Again, they hated the Mu'tazilis basically, but a work like Abu Sa'd's, it became an important text even for them, because at the end of the day he's quoting ahadith, and these scholars had access to certain ahadith that maybe even the Ahlul Hadith scholars wouldn't have, or the chains of transmissions would be something, they would bring new set of chains of transmissions, for example, because the more variety you have in the chains of transmitters, then the more reliable that narration could be considered, and so on. So you have these type of scholars as well who are there. Zaydis have a very, very significant literature in the Amali genre. Okay, so, and particularly they would have a lot of narrations that could be traced back to the Zaydis of Kufa. Okay, in the 2nd, 3rd century, Kufa and Zaydis from the 2nd, 3rd century hijri. So you have many of their works that contain narrations that can be, traced back to over there. Now, in the Amalis themselves, what type of narrations are these scholars quoting generally? Okay, is there like a set theme or a set narration? What's going on over here? No. It depends on the scholar. Okay, now you have to understand, for the vast majority of Imla sessions, it's not that you just have a Shia audience. No. Most of the times, in a gathering of Imla, you have people from so if it's a Shia scholar, for example, you definitely have non-Shia in the audience as well. And what the scholars are essentially going to do is they're going to try and quote narrations, whether it is to do with akhlaq, or whether it has to do with theology, or whatever matter, historical points, and they will try to quote from works of hadith where the chains of transmitters are not even Shia half the time. So for example, if you look at the Amali of some of the Shia scholars, we have 3-4 main books that are published today. We have some others as well, but 3-4 of the main ones. Sheikh Saduq has an Amali, Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, Sayyid Murtada, the one who I started off with. Particularly the, Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, and Sheikh Saduq. So if you look at Sheikh Saduq's Amali, there's a lot of transmitters in it that are not even Shia. Sunni chains of transmitters. And the reason why they're doing this is because they have people in the audience who are not Shia. And they want to strengthen their own points. Okay, the Shia scholar will come and they will want to strengthen their own point of belief or historical point that they want to argue. And for that, they're going to have to use chains of transmitters that are not even from our own books. And this is very, very common. And that's why the Amali genre becomes very interesting, because you get access and an exposure to seeing, what type of books the Shia scholars had access to. What type of narrations from non-Shia works the scholars had access to. And you can also corroborate a lot of things between the Shia and the Sunni hadith literature. Okay, that's why the Amali book becomes extremely important, especially when it's a hadith book like Saduq's or Sheikh Mufid or Sheikh Tusi's, because you can start seeing now patterns, and you can start seeing, okay, what type of teachers they had, what type of books that they have in their possession, whichever scholar. Now, after when you open an Amali book, okay, when you open, let's say, Sheikh Saduq's book, which I will, we'll skim through it right now. When you open it up, you will often see a sort of order, a very nice order, and so on, and ordering of hadith and so on. It's possible that this very clean ordering that you see, like let's say you see ordering in the books, in the Amali of Sheikh Mufid or Sheikh Tusi, it's possible that this very nice clean ordering of the hadith and chapter by chapter, this was probably not done by, at the time of Imla. This was most likely edited and, organized after the sessions were finished, and then the scholar looked over them, and the, the scribe who was writing it down, the Mustamli, they, for example, looked at it and they organized it, and, and then they basically distributed it. So it's not necessarily the case that the scholar himself was, organizing the narrations in that particular order, because we do have some indications that that was not always the case. But then on the other hand, you do have, for example, Sheikh Saduq's Amali. Well, you can see that, it's going jalasa by jalasa, like one session after session. Okay, majlis number this. Well, Sheikh Mufid's is like that as well, but I was referring in particular to the ordering of the narrations. Okay, so when you look at Sheikh Saduq's Amali, you can see it even says the year. It even say, this, Sheikh, our Sheikh finished this session while sitting in the shrine of Imam Rida alayhi salam, for example. So, and the year and date and the month and everything is written by the writers. Okay, which makes it very, very interesting, because you almost kind of go into that atmosphere, like, wow, Sheikh Saduq is sitting here in the shrine of Imam Rida alayhi salam, he's quoting this, he must have had a gathering, okay, but Khurasan is not all Shia at that time, there's many, non-Shia people living there as well, and they would have been in that audience. It's very interesting to see, you can see a written record of what was actually happening in real life. So that's very, very interesting. Now, what we want to look at here is, I actually want to go through Aqa Buzurg Tehrani. Okay, Aqa Buzurg Tehrani was a scholar of the last century. He has a work called al-Dharīʿa. Okay, al-Dharīʿa is basically a very lengthy work of bibliography where he compiles, the name of like every single Shia book that has ever been written. Okay, most of them probably don't even exist anymore, but he had access to a obviously massive library. He had access to manuscripts, he had access to a lot of things, and he was able to produce this extremely important work. Now, in this work, he has a section called al-Amali. Okay, and as I said, he's mostly going to be quoting. He only quotes the works of Shi'i scholars. Sometimes he will mention, non-Imami scholars as well. For example, he'll quote Zaydis or Ismailis, and he will put their works in there as well. But I want to look at what Aqa Buzurg Tehrani says. Okay, he says al-Amali is a title لبعض كتب الحديث غالبا. Okay, most of the times it's a title that is given to books of hadith. Okay. And this is the book, and this what is so special about the Amali book? What is so special about it? He says in this book are the ahadith that are they're compiled, which are al-ahadith al-masmu'a min Imla al-Shaykh. These are the narrations that have been written down in a book from the Imla of the Shaykh, from the dictation of a Shaykh, of a scholar. Okay, والغالب عليها ترتيبه على مجالس السماع ولذا يطلق عليه المجالس. Because most of the times they are ordered in the way that the majlis was given. So the hadith books, they will have some sort of ordering. Like, for example, if you open up Usul al-Kafi, it will start off with the kitab of aql, and then you have the kitab of ilm, and so on and so forth. There's almost like a thematic ordering. But in the al-Amali, there's no thematic ordering per se. It's just based off of the order of the sessions. So session number 1, the scholar may have had some intentions. Maybe it was Muharram and he wanted to talk about Muharram ahadith that day. Okay, maybe it was the month of Ramadan or Rajab, and just because of that he wanted to discuss the month of narrations about Rajab. But in that he will also discuss some historical point that comes up. So he's saying the ordering of these majalis in these al-Amali works is just based off of the sessions that would take place. Session number 1, these are the narrations that were mentioned. Session number 2, these are the other narrations. Okay. And وَهُوَ نَظِيرُ الْأَصْل. It is like an asl. Asl were these books, written. Maybe we'll do an entire session on, what was an asl and, what is a kitab and so on. But asl was essentially, to put it in brief, it was, a series of works, manuscripts that were written most of the times either by the companions of the Imams alayhimus salam or, narrators who had heard from the companions of the Imams. And he's saying that the Amali is almost like an asl in its strength. Because why is an asl so important? Because if you notice, the medium between the Imam and the actual book, which is the asl, is very little. It's just the one companion, and the companion has heard from the Imam, and the companion writes it down, and well, that's an asl. Well, it's not going to get more reliable than that. You have just heard the Imam and you've written it down. Okay, so it's very reliable, because it's not that you have 5 people listening to it and Imam says to one person and then the second person says to the third person and 200 years later somebody writes it down. No, it's not like that. The asl is very the chains of transmitters and the mediums are very, very little in it, 1 or 2. So he says that the al-Amali is very similar to that, because the people who are writing the hadith down, they're just hearing it directly from the teacher. So it's not like there's 10 different mediums the report has to go through before getting to the scribe. No, it's right there in the session. They listen to it and they write it down. So he says very strong. Then he starts going to a list of the different amalis that have been produced by Shi'i scholars. Okay, and he goes. It's about a couple of pages over here. It's about 7-8 pages. Okay, so what I wanted to go is just highlight some of the significant ones. And he starts off by the Amali Sayyidina wa Nabiyina Abil Qasim Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. He says the first Amali I'm going to talk about is the Amali of the Holy Prophet. Okay, so now this is very confusing, because we said the Amali literature genre was produced in maybe 2nd century, 3rd century. That's when it really took shape, and that's when we start seeing names of books and so on. So where did this Amali of the Prophet come from? Well, he says that, look, there is a work that the Prophet dictated to Imam Ali alayhi salam. Okay, and it is written in the handwriting of Imam Ali. He says, هذا أول كتاب كتب في الإسلام من كلام البشر من إملاء النبي وخط الوصي. It is the first book, written in the world, in Islam, basically, which is basically an Imla of the Prophet, and it is written in the handwriting of his wasi. Okay, and the complete nuskha of it, the complete manuscript of it, is there with the inheritors of this wasi, and they are there with the Imam alayhimus salam. Okay, it was with the Imams alayhimus salam and so on. And there are occasions that we see in our books of hadith where the Imams would often sometimes refer to it, or they will open it up, and companions will ask them, what is this book? And they would say, this is a book that was dictated to Imam Ali by the Prophet. Okay, now what is interesting is that Aqa Buzurg Tehrani says that there is a portion of this Amali that is that is preserved in the Amali of Sheikh Saduq. Okay, he says a portion of this Amali is there in the Amali of Sheikh Saduq. Okay, so we're gonna open up. So this is a very interesting website. It's called thaqalain.net, and they have the English translations for a lot of different hadith books, basically. Now, if you go on it, so 2 of the Amalis are here. One, al-Amali of Sheikh Mufid, and then there's an Amali of Sheikh Saduq. Okay, so Sheikh Mufid died 413 hijri, and Sheikh Saduq died 381. So he says that a part of the Amali of the Prophet to Imam Ali alayhi salam is preserved in the Amali of Sheikh Saduq. And where does he say? He says it's in session number, should be 66. Okay, so look at the Amali. So look, if you guys look at it, it says, the first assembly, which was Friday, 12 nights remaining in the month of Rajab in 367 hijri. In 367 hijri, Sheikh Saduq went from Ray to Khurasan. So he used to reside in Ray under the Buyid dynasty. I think the governor's name was Rukn al-Dawla. And he moved to, or he went to visit Khurasan, and he stayed there for about a year or so. This was, I believe it was his 3rd trip to Mashhad, to Khurasan. Now, he says the first assembly. So if you look at the first assembly, it begins like this, and so on and so forth. So he quotes a couple of narrations, and then it ends over here. Now, if we go to the 66th assembly of Tuesday, the 13th of Jamadi al-Ula, 368. Okay, this is a narration, basically right here. So you can see it's very long. And Aqa Buzurg Tehrani says, well, this is a part of the Imla that the Prophet did on Imam Ali alayhi salam, and it has been preserved in the Amali of Sheikh Saduq. Okay, so it's a long narration, it's a long report. Maybe they should put some paragraphs in this. But anyways, if you look at the end of it, okay, it says, Muhammad bin Zakaria al-Ghilabi says, I asked Shu'ayb al-Muzni, the narrator, about the length of this report. So he said to me, O Aba Abdullah, I asked al-Husayn bin Zayd about the length of this hadith. It's very long. So he said, Ja'far bin Muhammad bin Ali bin Husayn bin Ali Talib narrated to me that he gathered this hadith from a book that was the dictations of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the handwriting of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. So the Imams alayhi salam are saying that, look, this was actually the dictations of the Prophet to Imam Ali alayhi salam. And what does Aqa Buzurg say about this? He says, after he says this, he says, we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that at least this small portion has reached us, and we وَنَسْأَلُهُ تَوْفِيقَ زِيَارَةَ تَمَامِهِ بِزِيَارَةِ مَنْ هُوَ مَدْخُورٌ عِنْدَهُ. That we pray for the opportunity that we are able to see the entire book, the entire Amali, alongside the ziyarah of the one with whom this book is basically treasured, it is protected with him, which is obviously the 12th Imam alayhi salam. So this is one of the Amalis that he says, and this is the first one. So then he goes on and he quotes a couple other Amalis that are there by different ulama. He mentions the Amali of al-Sharif Abi Muhammad al-Nasir al-Kabir al-Atrush. Okay, now there is some difference of opinion. Many scholars believe that this Nasir al-Kabir al-Atrush was a Shia. Some say he was a Zaydi. It seems, to be very honest, he was a Zaydi. At least that has been my research and my inclination, that he was most likely a Zaydi scholar. And he was from the he was basically the grandfather of Sayyid Murtada, Sayyid Radi. Okay, so that is one of the Amalis he mentions. Then he mentions the Amal. He mentions a couple more. Then he mentions the Amali of Sheikh Tusi. Okay, Sheikh Tusi, who died 460 Hijri. He mentions the Amali of Sheikh Saduq. Okay. He mentions the Amali of Sheikh Mufid. Who else? He mentions the Amali of Ibn al-Shajari that I was speaking about earlier. Ibn al-Shajari's thing. And so look, he's mentioned him here as a Shi'i scholar, right? So he says that he lived in Karkh, and he was buried in Karkh as well. He mentions the Amali of one of the teachers of Sheikh Tusi. Okay, one of the teachers, his name is Hilal bin Muhammad bin Ja'far bin Sa'adan al-Haffar. Okay, who died in 414 Hijri. Now this individual, this scholar, he says this person also had an Amali. Now this Amali is also preserved in Sheikh Tusi's Amali. Sheikh Tusi is quoting a lot from this scholar's Amali. Okay, then you have another Amali of al-Natiq bil-Haq Abi Talib Yahya bin Husayn al-Ahwal ibn Harun al-Aqta bin Husayn bin Muhammad bin Harun bin Muhammad al-Bathai al-Husayni. Okay, born in 340 Hijri, and this individual, and he died in 424, min a'immat al-Zaydiyya. Okay, so he is saying that this individual, al-Harun ibn al-Harun, was a Zaydi, and he also has an Amali. Now what's interesting is that he quotes another Amali, and he in Arabic he says this is called the Amali al-Abbasi. Okay, and he says this is actually in Farsi. The original Amali is in Farsi, called Ayine Abbasi, and it is a Farsi Amali fi Radd al-Yahud wal-Nasara wal-Majus. It's a refutation of the Jews, the Christians, and the Zoroastrians. وإثبات النبوة الخاصة. Okay, and basically it's an Amali that proves the prophethood of the last messenger. Now who did it belong to? It belongs to Mirza Mohammad bin Abdul Nabi ibn Ahmad al-Sani al-Naysapuri al-Hindi al-Shahir bil-Akhbari al-Maqtul bil-Kadimiyya. Okay, he says this is the Amali of basically Mirza Mohammad Akhbari. Okay, Mirza Mohammad Akhbari al-Maqtul, who was killed. Okay, who was killed in the year 1232 Hijri. And why did he write this Amali? He wrote it because of Abbas Mirza, who was the son of Sultan Fatah Ali Shah. Okay, Fatah Ali Shah was the Qajar ruler of Iran at that time, and he wrote this because the son of Fatah Ali Shah asked him to write it. This fate, Mirza Mohammad Akhbari is an interesting figure. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. He was killed basically by a mob of people I believe it was in Qadhimain, if I'm not mistaken. I have an article. There is an article on Iqra describing why he was killed. It had to do with the disputes of the Usulis and the Akhbari. So Mirza Muhammad Akhbari was the last major Akhbari figure, if you want to call him, and he was very, very anti-Usuli. He was very anti Sheikh Wahid Bahbahani and so on. And anyways, there's an entire story. Maybe we will discuss him a little bit in more detail when maybe one day we'll talk about the Akhbaris and the Usulis. But I will link the article about Mirza Muhammad Akhbari in the description, so you can go have a look. What exactly happened over there. So this is what we want to talk about today. I want to wrap it up with some interesting tidbits from the Amali of Sayyid Murtada. Sayyid Murtada's Amali is not a typical Amali. Okay, the Amali of Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, Sheikh Saduq are hadith books essentially. Okay, these are just hadith books. You can go, there's chain of narrators in them. You verify them just like you would do with any other hadith book and so on. Sayyid Murtada, his Amali, I would say, is probably one of the best Amalis that we have. And unfortunately, even in the Shi'i Hawzat, it's not very, very, not even well known. It's not well read or anything like that. And you would be surprised that it's actually the Sunnis who have taken this Amali very, very seriously. They have even, they're one of the first ones to actually publish it in Egypt. So this Amali, why is it so important? Is, Sayyid Murtada has a very, very strong grasp of Arabic grammar, poetry. He is known for his strength, in the rational sciences, meaning his intellectual power is very strong. He's a mutakallim, he's a strong theologian, and he is very well known amongst the Ahlul Sunnah, the Zaydis, and different groups that existed in Baghdad at that time. His class, this Amali that he's delivering, definitely had non-Shias in it. He himself had studied with so many non-Shia scholars. Anyways, he was extremely strong. And this Amali also is not an easy read. So the Amali of Sheikh Saduq and the Amali of Sheikh Mufid and the Amali of Sheikh Tusi, these can be easily translated. Not easily, but they can be translated because they're just hadith at the end of the day, right? The Amali of Sayyid Murtada is not really a hadith work. It's a analysis, and he offers complicated analysis of difficult tafasir of the ayat, analysis of different hadiths which are hard to explain, and there's a lot of poetry in it as well. So when it becomes like that, it becomes a very difficult text to translate. He uses a lot of different things. He uses his intellect a lot in this. Every other section he is doing some sort of a ta'wil, some sort of a figurative reading of the narration of the ayat or the narrations, but he obviously backs it up with a lot of different evidence and so on. So I actually wanted to just go through a couple of interesting sections from this book to sort of show you. So there's two versions of this. Well, I think there's more than two, but I have these two. One is I have this version here of the published al-Amali of Sayyid Murtada. Right, so this is, they call it 4 sections, so 4 volumes. It's not really 4 volumes. It's just 4 sections of the book. Okay, that's one version. And then I purchased this as well. This is the 2 volumes in it together in one version. I don't want to bore you with the publishers and the dates and what is the difference between these books and so on. I don't want to waste the time. So what we will do, I mean, there's an interesting story why I have both. I believe I first purchased these ones. I had purchased these ones in Qom from Passage Quds. Those who know Qom will know where that is. And then I think after a couple of months, I just found this one as well. And I just said it's just a better print. So I just picked it up as well. So that's the story with that. So let's see. What do we have? There was a couple of things, interesting ones that I wanted to look at. Okay. For example, he says, روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله أنه قال. There's a narration that is narrated from the Holy Prophet where he says, لا تسبوا الدهر فإن الدهر هو الله. Do not curse dahr. Okay, do not curse, basically, time. Okay, dahriyun were, a very, prominent group of, basically, mulhideen, atheists. Okay, dahr. So they believe basically time governs your existence. So everything that happens in this cosmos is because of time. And this was a very prominent group of, non-disbelievers and non-believers who lived at the time of the Prophet. So the Prophet says, do not curse time because time is Allah. Okay, so Sayyid Murtada is gonna try and answer this. Like, what do you mean Allah is time? We say Allah doesn't even have time. He's outside of time. So how can you say, فَإِنَّ الدَّهْرَ هُوَ اللَّهِ? Dahr is Allah. So don't curse it. So he goes on and on and on. Okay, and he says, well, some people say that, the ta'wil of this khabar is that, don't curse the time. Don't curse the time because the fi'l is not of the time. Like the time is not the one that is making you sick or giving you, problems. There's a better way to explain this. He says there's a better way to explain it. He says, look, وَفِي هَذَا الْخَبَرْ وَجْحٌ هُوَ أَحْسَنُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ الَّذِي حَقَيْنَاهُ. He said there's a better way to explain this. He says, look, the mulhideen, they would negate a sani'. Okay, there was a group of this mulhideen who would negate that there's a creator. Okay, and they would attribute all the creation of things to basically time, because they were ignorant of the fact that there is a sani' who creates all of these things. So instead they would curse the time, okay, and they would condemn the time, من كثير في كثير من الأحوال. All the time, they would, anything bad that would happen, they would say, curse on time, curse on dahr. So he's saying, Sayyid Murtada is saying that, look, it's because they would attribute the creation of, whether it's sickness or calamities or whatever, any hardship that comes in their life, they would accuse and curse the dahr, meaning they would believe that dahr is the one who is creating all of this for us. So the Holy Prophet ﷺ is saying, don't curse the dahr. Rather, because the dahr is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that you are saying, because you're cursing the creator. When the mulhideen, when the atheists or the dahriyun, when they would curse the time, they're doing it with the intention of cursing the one who actually is the creator of all of this. So the Prophet is saying, don't curse the dahr. The dahr that you are cursing is actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the one who is creating these trials and tribulations for you. So that's how Sayyid Murtada is saying, that's how we should explain this. That's what is going on. Not that Allah is time. No, the dahr that you are cursing, because you are attributing the fi'l, the action of this dahr, of these calamities, to this time, the file, the actual file, or the actual sani, the actual creator of all this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't do that. So that's what he is saying over here. Another interesting place where he sort of uses his, rationality to explain away a narration. He says, look, what is so he starts with a question. Okay, remember in the Adab book of Samʿānī, he says that, the Adab, one of the Adab or the etiquettes of the person who is beginning the Imla is to begin with a question. Okay, so that's how almost all of these Amalis begin. In sa'ala sa'il an qawlihi. If a questioner asks this question, how will we answer? Okay, very almost like a Socratic method. If this is the question, well, what's the answer? Then you kind of go back and forth. And they were all impacted by that sort of thinking and argumentation. So once again he says, in qala qa'il, if a person says, what is the ta'wil of the khabar which is being narrated from the Prophet, that innal mayyit, that the dead person will be given the punishment when somebody cries upon them. Okay, so let's say somebody passes away and their family member is now crying on them because they have passed away. Well, the person who has just died is going to get azab for it. Okay, and in another version of the same report, that this mayyit will get the azab in the qabr because of the wailing that is being done upon him. So people who are alive who are wailing upon him, this person is going to get azab for it, and so on. So he mentions another version of this narration as well. He says, look, I don't even need to answer this because this goes against the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, he says this simply, so look, he's using his intellect. He says this is impossible. It is impossible that a person who has died, now somebody else is crying for them, and then, so it's their act. But yet this person who is not doing the act, they are the ones getting the sin for it, and they're the ones getting punished for it. So he says this is against the principles of intellectuality and rationality, and hence I will not even bother explaining this narration. I don't even accept it. And then he says, well, okay, if the intellect is not enough, well, what about the ayah of the Quran, Surah al-An'am, ayah 164? وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Okay, nobody is going to take the burden of somebody else upon themselves. If you commit a certain act, well, I'm not the one who's going to bear the burden of that act. Okay, especially if it's a bad deed. So he says there's no choice, if you really want to accept this narration, if you feel that no, it really is authentic and so on, well, you have to explain it away, because there's no way it actually means what the apparent textual meaning of it is saying. So he says, look, fine, if you still insist, the possible explanation of this, in sahhat riwayatuha, if the riwayah happens to be correct, is that, look, if innahu idha awsa musin, if the person who is now dead, if they did a wasiyah, if they made a will, that look, after I die, people, XYZ person, you guys should cry upon me, you should wail and scream and so on, and then they go and do that act because he commanded them to do so, he says, well, in this case, that person who is now dead will get the punishment, because actually he commanded them to do so. It is part of his fi'l now. He says, and the meaning of this is not that he's just gonna get punished simply because they're crying. Rather, he is gonna get punished and azab بِأَمْرِهِ بِهَا, because he commanded them to do so. وَوَصِيَّتِهِ بِفِعْلِهَا, because of his wasiyah to them that they must do so. Okay, and there's a whole discussion on this whole wailing and crying and so on. To what extent is it allowed and is not allowed? Was it a jahiliyyah practice and so on? Because we have narrations that prevent, for example, opening the collars up and so on. That's another discussion for another time. Anyways, I hope that this gave a very a brief exposure into the world of al-Amali. We had al-Amalis written by the Sunnis, the Zaydis, the Shia, and then also you had Amalis written by grammarians, in particular the Mu'tazilis. Most of them were written by the hadith scholars, but you do have Amalis like the Amali of Sayyid Murtada, which is not just a hadith book, it's a book of critical thinking, essentially. That's what it is. Taking every ayah, explaining it, looking at difficult discussions from the Quran, from the hadith, from the narrations, and really, really engaging with it in a very thorough manner. That's what Sayyid Murtada's Amali is. It's recommended for, particularly like if you are in the seminary and you have studied Arabic for quite a good extent, it is a book that is worth going through and testing your Arabic skills, because it's a very tough book. I remember we tried to set up a class in Qom with our same teacher, Ustad Azizi. I will definitely be sending this to him. He doesn't understand English, but I'll still tell him I quoted him on this. We tried to we insisted a lot to him to set up a class, but I think he was caught up, so he wasn't able to do so. So kind of had to read it ourselves and go through it ourselves. It is a very tough book, but it's definitely gonna open your eyes up to the level of scholarship and to the level of critical thinking some of our ulama were engaged in. They did not take things very lightly and as a joke. These discussions meant a lot to them, because at the end of the day, it's the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the narrations from the Ma'sumeen alayhimus salam. These are not a joke per se. These are very, very serious messages that have a huge impact on the way you live, on what you believe in, and your worldviews and your your ideologies and so on and so forth. So inshallah, I hope that this introduction kind of gave you a glimpse into the type of discussions that we will be having. I wanted to start off with the al-Amali because that's what we are called, the dictations. Inshallah, I think the next session I'll probably be talking about something to do with the seerah of the Holy Prophet. I'm not sure, but let's see. And my experiences with the seerah of the Holy Prophet. I hope to see you all in that as well. If there's any advice and feedback, constructive criticism on how I should set this up, please feel free to drop a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and share this video as well. And I will see you all in a future video, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.